done. So let's talk about now the graded work. So this week we're starting a whole new topic. So now we've spent a lot of time relating, learning how to relate tables, subqueries, joins, using what we've already known. So now we're moving to designing, which means it's very different the way the queries are going to work now. Okay, so I've given you a link here, and what I would say is if you want, you can look at, here's what you need to do: create your folder. I'll show you mine in a minute. Create a new folder designing, create the README file. Anyway, do all this work. And then when you're ready, do your commit, and then we will do some work together. So pause here, set that up, and then when you're ready, come back. All right, so here's my setup. I've done my commit. I have my README file. I'll come back to that in a minute. I have my week 12 attendance query. I've changed my proof of work. And now I have something here that's new, which is I haven't identified the database, because one thing Carter will do, and you're going to actually watch the first 20 minutes of the lecture as part of this attendance, but he will go back and look at the differences in the database from querying to relating, because of course in querying we had one table, relating we had two. And he does it in a way because his week structure is different. And I thought, you know what, this is a good idea right now to show you. And in this case, I'm actually going to see if you can answer this. And then I, of course, will show you the answer, but I want to see your attempt at this. If I wanted to look at the schema for the long list that's setting in query, and then look at the long list setting in relating, and I wanted to output the schema, what would I change here to do that? Now, you, of course, going over there and going to those folders, but in that case, you might also think, well, how about if I just copy it? And that's not the answer, okay? Neither of those things are the answer, because we have everything we need here. What we need is, how do we reference the database that's setting not in the current folder? Because everything we've dealt with up until now has been the database is setting in the current folder. Now also notice that on the instruction, I don't have you copy a database this week, okay? So, and that's because you're going to create them, okay? When we're designing, we're actually creating the database structure, the tables that you've been seeing in the schema. So now you're going to learn to write code that creates not only the tables, but the relationships and what we call the data types and storage types and affinities. These are all terms you're going to learn this week. You won't know them now, don't worry. So here's my question. Right? So in your README file, add a week 12 attendance and say, answer, how can we reference the different versions of the long list database without copying it to the designing folder? So give me your answer. It's okay, guess, right? And actually, it's okay to stop and actually think about how do you do this, because this actually speaks to the idea of understanding file and folder structures and how we navigate when we're writing command line to reference them. Okay, so right now we're in designing. That's where this query file for this week is setting. Okay, so how do I get now to reference the long list? Okay, so you might think that I just do, right? How about, and in the querying folder, long list and .db. You might think that's it. And that's not a bad guess. The problem with this is that in this case, we actually have to back one out, so we're at the same level as querying, okay, as far as the structure goes, but we're currently in the designing folder. So what we need to do here is ... And we do that, then we can take this command. Oh, before we do that, matter of fact, let's just go ahead and do that, and we'll talk about it along the way. Now notice I'm not running my SQLite here because we don't have a database yet. We're just looking at how do we then look at the other versions of the long list through running, first our typical bash command, right? So if I do this right now here, will this work? And the answer is no, because I have to be in the designing folder. Now, when I hit enter here, I do get I get some content. And if I look in here, I can see where it's coming from. But what I didn't do is I didn't uncomment that file that I wanted just the schema, right? So this command outputs what I want, but and this is important because this week, a lot of what you're going to use once you write the query and you copy it into the command line, you're going to be using this .schema. So let's just go ahead and remind ourselves now that you could just run .schema. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of this file right now. Okay? And now I'm going to run this again. And when I do that now and I look at here, I now see schema for the single table version of long list. And so this is part of what you're going to learn this week. You've been outputting this schema data all along, but not really having a clear, probably comprehension of what it is. But this week you will gain that. Okay? And in this case, it is going to look a little different because we're not going to write if it exists. The schema actually refers to the data, the table itself, to do that. Okay? So now let's actually output the one from relating, right? I could, again, challenge you. Now that you know this, how would you do it, right? By the way, for those of you, because I've been in reviews now, if I wanted to do multiple lines, command for me, Mac for you, Windows / toggles that back and forth. Learn that. It makes your life so much easier. But in this case, right, I'm just going to do one line because I already have the content here. Now the schema for the multiple table version, or we could call it the relating table version. And now how would I change this? I would still want to back up, but I'd want to have this be relating. Okay? And so now, when I copy this, okay? Uh-oh, evidently not. Let's see, what did I forget? Oh, yeah. Is that what it was? I don't think that should make a difference. Is there a colon? Where is there a colon? I can hear Justin saying, real world. Yeah, there must have been. Actually, that's true. I ran into that before. If there's a space there, it won't do it. Oh, yes. Okay, and look. So now we see the multiple table relationship foreign key that we've been seeing over the last several weeks. Okay, so now we have both versions of that. So let's go ahead now, right now that we're here, git add star, git commit -m, right? Just a schema for different long list DBs. Okay, all right. We're not going to push it. We'll do that in a minute. Okay, so now that we have that, we'll end that for a second because now I want to actually move to, right? I just wanted to show you that because Carter covers that at the beginning and I thought, you know what? This is good just to understand. But now I'm going to go back to having this be, okay? Because what's the database? So in this case, the database you're going to create first with Carter is going to be the MTBA. Okay, now you'll take notes and I'll talk about this in a minute. But in this case, I'm going to create a different database with you, okay, because I want you to see the process because it is very different than what we've been doing before. What we're doing now is we're writing SQL that actually creates a table. And so once you get that done correctly, once you write that code, you don't write it again unless you have deleted or dropped that table. So in this case, we can still write it, and I would. So let's actually write, in this case, I'm going to say create, and this is what you're going to learn. And let's create, right, a table called students. And this is the syntax you're going to see Carter will use. So create table is actually an SQL command. And in this case, let's say we're going to create an ID. Now, when you are looking at, matter of fact, let's just go ahead and open it to the side so we can see it. When you're doing this by the end of this whole 2 weeks, you'll understand more of how to determine what data types that you have, how to set up foreign and primary keys, and why you would do it based on the requirements of the data. All I'm doing is showing you here is just the concept of creating a table. Okay, and when you do that, you hit comma. Now again, there's a lot more that's coming. I'm just giving you that base. And then let's do first name, okay, and now comma, right, and last name. Now on the last one of all your columns, because that's what you're creating here, you don't put a comma. Sorry, yeah, and you do need the semicolon when you're going to paste it, okay? So now what will happen here is that when we run this, we have to have already had a database structure. And so in this case, we haven't built that shell yet. And so I'm going to go ahead and start another session. I'm going to move to the designing. Okay. And here is the key, is I'm going to run SQLite with the name of the database I want to create. So let's call it CIT28SP25. Right? So in this case, when you're running and we actually saw this at some point, if you had run SQLite but you didn't type the database correctly, it actually created that shell, that structure, that file, let's say. So if I do this here, and it's creating it in the background, but it actually doesn't actually put it on the disk until you do something else. I want you to know, and you will see this in the work. When you hit enter here, and actually when Carter does it, it actually asks him if he wants to create a database, and ours doesn't. I actually need to figure out why. They've got something in CodeSpace set up, but that's okay because we can learn it. Okay. So now if I come over here and I hit copy, right, and I paste this, watch what will happen as soon as you do your first create table, right? Look over here and watch what will happen. When I come over here and do it, then it creates the database. And not until then does it create the database. Okay? And that's what's important to understand, that when you're doing, and by the way, if we tried this command again, right? If I actually tried to run this again, I would get an error because guess what? It already exists. So I could create another table, and you will. But oftentimes, and you'll see this in my code along, what I want you to do is output the schema. So what I would do, control /, because now, and this is what we're actually going to do in our other terminal, come down here. Now, what do we change here? Right? To the database we created. CIT28, we grab this, copy, right? We come here. And when we do that, we look at here, and now at the bottom, we will see the table, table schema for the database and the table we created. So that's what I want you to understand. When you move into the code along work, okay, that is going to be the way when I say do the proof of work, and you'll see me say this, right? Because you write the query, and you do need to have the query that you've written in here, because this helps you write good syntax. You then copy it, run it on the command line, get it right, fix any errors you would have, right? Comment it out. And I would just leave this here, right? And by the way, you could just leave this here, and then whenever you run your proof of work, because I think almost every time with the code alongs, that's all you're outputting. You are doing quite a few notes this week, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So actually, let's start there, but let's finish up here by doing git add star. Oh, that's right. It gives that message because of the database. It's not going to copy it, right? Creating the CIT28 database. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do a git push because remember, that's what I look at. Okay, so I just wanted you to understand that because you're going to see this, and this is very different what we're about to do. It's not like writing a query, getting a result set. You're writing code that's creating structure, and that's what designing is in some sense, but it's also much, much more importantly, and in this case, what you're going to learn here where you learn about normalization. So and let's just actually move into what you're going to do here. So now you've coded along with me. There's nothing you need to do here. Now watch the first 20 minutes of his lecture, okay? And I've actually given you right the heading. So we'll put this now in your README file underneath the answer you gave me, right? So you're heading 1, and you'll see me start to abbreviate these headings, like add markdown heading 1 with text, right? Just because by now I'm knowing you have this, and if you want to ask me, you absolutely can. So in this case, you'll have 3 different sections you'll take notes on, right? Again, this is just for you and I to look at, but watch the first 20 minutes of Carter's lecture. Again, nothing you need to submit here. And then you reply, tell us something from the first 20 minutes that sounds interesting or something that you look forward to learning more about. And maybe it's the same thing, right? But tell us something about what came to your mind. And by the way, if it doesn't come to your mind, then one of the things I definitely tell you to think about is go do some more ChatGPT, Gen AI, Googling about what normalization is, because this is a topic that's not covered a lot here. And it is something that as you continue to work with databases, you will learn, okay? Because many times you're just working with databases that already existed, like we've done already in this database, but sometimes depending on the job that you have, you'll be actually creating database structures. And the couple times I've had to do this from scratch, understanding this process became more and more real as I was doing it. All right, so and this is getting into what you have to do for watching this, right? So, and then do your commit message, right? And then follow in here. So now that's where you're back in here talking about this. So, and then 1 reply. Okay, so I'm also going to cover here the rest of the what you need to do, because there's really, I feel like I've covered everything you need to know here, right? About how this is different and how you comment these things out. But most of the time in your proof of work, right, you're doing a dot schema and you still have your commits. I did give a legend at the beginning just to show, like, here's your heading. So when I say H1, that's the markdown. When I want outlines, because you're actually taking quite a few notes that are so, so important. I can't overemphasize the importance of what you're going to learn this week with data types and data storage. Breaks still there. And then talking about these constraints. I mean, these are just fundamental topics that you really want to walk away understanding. Now, one thing is Carter's going to do what's called a dot read, which is basically when you're in a, matter of fact, did I stop? I didn't stop my code space. So one of the things last semester, I did it this way. And in this sense, we could read just the SQL file. And I think I actually might do an example of this next week. I had considered changing our workflows, but honestly, I feel like most of you now have the workflow down, so I don't want to change it. But it is good to know. And I think I'll cover this next week, is understanding, because all this time before now, Carter's been doing mostly of what we've been doing, except we've already been creating our SQL file. He creates the schema.sql and then just reads it from the SQL system, subsystem. And in that case, it's just it's a very common way to do it. So I just want you to know we're not doing it this way. Follow our processes when you're in here. Again, the dot schema, run your point of proof of work, your text affinities, create your tables. And then you get into doing the primary keys and explain in this case, right? And now you're going to code the foreign key. All right, so that goes over both the attendance and the code along the lecture work for this week. All right, I'll talk to you later. Hope this helps.